From the US-China rivalry to Russia's war of attrition, the Middle East, and Trump, let's talk about what happened this year and how it will affect us moving on to the next. This is 2024, a year in review. This is the Dangerous Waters podcast, where we dive deep into dangerous waters. I'm your host, Alex, and in today's episode, we have a special. It is the final day of 2024, so let's take this day and wrap some things up. Let's talk about the biggest trends of this year and how it will affect us going to next year. Our first trend is a large one. It probably defines the majority of the dynamics that are going on in the world today, and that is the US-China rivalry. This is a rivalry that is shaking up the core of the United States from every possible foundation. You could look at this politically, you could look at this economically, trade, all of these most important factors that contribute to a country's success is at risk because of China's rise. At least if you look at it from the American side, this is a country now that has most of the world's manufacturing under its belt. This is a country with growing geopolitical influence, but mostly economic influence at this point. They are developing rapidly in technology. They have almost 10 times more yearly STEM graduates than the United States. It's amazing how fast China has progressed over the past few years, and especially from the 2010s to today. They are at a level that is so competitive with the United States, militarily, economically, everywhere. And for the United States, a country which has essentially had world dominance since World War II, obviously you had the Soviet Union during the Cold War, but they fell in the late 80s, and the US held effectively world supremacy under its belt for the past few decades, and is now slowly losing that over time because of China's parallel rise and global ambitions. Now in 2024, we have actually seen a decrease of Chinese influence around the world. This is especially prominent in the Middle East, where China tried to broker peace deals. They tried to influence Middle Eastern countries, and that has all been completely gone under the rug. We'll talk about this more later. But economically, China is also in a bit of a bind. They are currently in a deflationary environment, highly export-oriented. A lot of their GDP growth came from real estate. So now you're left with these massive ghost cities where almost no one lives. The places where people actually want to go, the major cities, are being overcrowded, but at the same time, house prices are skyrocketing and people do not have adequate money to find places to live in the areas that are actually wanted. Now, moving forward to next year, I do believe many of these problems will become more prominent, and China will have to double down on a lot of what's going on, and that involves a lot of political posturing by focusing on external things such as reunification with Taiwan or trying to reduce US, NATO influence around the world, and they're going to focus on issues like these to distract the world as well as their own population from their economic shortcomings. However, despite all that, I do believe China still has a very strong strategic base militarily and economically, and they will continue to meaningfully rival the United States moving forward. Now, another major trend that has been going on for the past few years and reshaping political alliances is Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, one thing you'll notice is that a lot of these topics will have intersections with each other. For example, because of Russia's war in Ukraine, countries like China now have far more influence in Russia, especially when it comes to trade. For example, China now has open access to a port in Vladivostok, Russia, that allows them to freely trade with Europe at a much easier level. At the same time, Russia just today announced approvals for Chinese railroad expansion projects into Central Asia, and it shows Russia's fragility in this area. Because they are so economically dependent on China, they now have to cower to Chinese demands in order to maintain the level of trade and the level of economic support that China has been providing for Russia to maintain their economy. Without this vital lifeline that China has given to Russia, Russia may very well collapse. This is something that Russia knows. This is something that they're worried about. So you could say that, oh, look, Russia and China have a no limits partnership. This is strategic. Everyone is supporting each other. We must stop the imperialism of the US and NATO. But you gotta look beyond the headlines. Now, Europe's role has also been very fascinating in how they are playing out the war in Ukraine. For example, when it comes to raw military equipment, ammunition, artillery, things like that, the United States is providing the vast majority of those weapons to Ukraine. And Europe, on the other hand, has been sending things like vehicles, planes, and a lot of financial assistance. But what you do notice is that effectively, the military support that Ukraine is getting is make or break depending on what the United States is able to send. What it means for Europe is that Europe at this point is not in a position to strategically change the outcome of the war in Ukraine by themselves. They do still require the United States to be part of the equation, to be integral in their ability to not only procure the weapons, but also transport them into Ukraine. Europe as a whole is on a large downturn. Economically, the United States has eclipsed them by far and is taking their businesses. They are also energy dependent on other countries such as the United States, and outside of Poland being a major exception, they have become complacent to US NATO military protection, resulting in the lack of maintenance and even downsizing in a lot of European countries. What happens with the war moving forward will largely hinge on the attitudes between Russian President Putin and US President Trump going into next year. As of now, you see a willingness to negotiate from both sides, but also a rejection of many of the demands that are being presented. Trump and his advisor Kellogg have been pushing out all sorts of different proposals, which Russia is rejecting every single one at this point. But what this does mean is that at least there is a level of engagement, and that strongman appearance will be very quickly torn down during the negotiation stage. At this point, what they are doing is they just want to show psychologically to the United States and to the rest of the world that we're not backing down, but they will when it comes to the negotiations. And if they don't, the US, with Trump's support, will be supporting Ukraine at levels that we've never seen before, and that outcome would be a real strategic threat to Russia's security and Russia's future. Outside of Russia, we also have a lot of activity happening in the Middle East. Now, there is always activity happening in the Middle East, but nowadays, especially last year, has been very interesting in the major rapid shifts of geopolitical influence between different countries in the region. For one, you see the majority of Israel's efforts against their adversaries since the October 7th attack in 2023. They have spent all of this year completely crippling the axis of resistance from the Hamas arm all the way to Hezbollah in Lebanon, destroying all of their leaders. You also see massive shifts going on in Syria, complete removal of the Assad regime, which Russia and Iran have spent billions of dollars to prop up over the decades. That is all gone. And you also see a de facto coalition between many countries, including the US, UK, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, in trying to destroy the Houthis in Yemen. Houthis are, at this point, the only powerful ally of Iran in the region capable of potentially threatening Middle Eastern security. And despite many of the countries I've mentioned having disagreements with each other, there is that common understanding and that common goal that they all want the Houthis to be gone. So what's the trend here? Well, the trend is that you got to look at the Middle East as sort of the boiling pot of world conflicts. And you also have to look at the countries involved in these conflicts. What you notice is that countries like the United States and Israel are on a major upward rise in their geopolitical influence in the Middle East, while there is notable absence coming from Russia, China, and Iran. So while Russia is busy fighting their own war in Ukraine, China also does not have the military capacity to spread their economic and military interests by force outside of their borders. Moving forward through next year, I believe that US and Israeli interests will continue to rise in the Middle East, while countries like Saudi Arabia may even end up in a diplomatic, strategic alliance with Israel. Hard to say for now, but I think it's possible. You'll also see Turkey continue their neo-Ottoman expansionism and potentially be at risk of colliding with US interests, and there may be small localized military conflicts between the two countries. Now for our final topic, let's talk about Donald J. Trump. Trump is a polarizing figure, but also a highly influential figure in the world. Despite not even being inaugurated yet, he has been playing a lot of roles in affecting US geopolitical positions around the world. For example, he believes that in order to make America great again, the United States needs to have the power that it did at its peak. This power that we're talking about consists of land expansion, for example, Greenland, Panama, and even potentially Canada, but it also extends far beyond that. It extends to energy. Trump has been pressuring European countries to buy more American gas and threatening tariffs to Europe if they don't do so. Trump also wants to highly expand American energy to rival OPEC and drive down world prices and make America the most powerful energy exporter in the world. What we also see from Trump is the reliance on the US dollar. We see Trump trying to defend the dollar in any way possible and prevent the formation of a combined BRICS currency or other currencies that may threaten dollar supremacy on the world level. In Trump's view, whoever controls the money controls the power, and he believes that with the United States being able to maintain its dollar, it is able to maintain its economy and maintain its global influence. But no matter what we will see from Trump moving forward into next year is a strong shift in geopolitical relations and tensions around the world. We may see new conflicts, we may see old conflicts go away. He holds a lot of power and a lot of influence. Despite the growing multipolarity of the world, Trump is still a nerve center, a power center of the world, and his decisions will have monumental impact in how the world moves forward from today. With that being said, thank you all for listening to this episode of Dangerous Waters. I hope you have a great new year. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, I will see you all in 2025.